Welcome to Live Life in the Spirit. We are your hosts. I'm Pastor Penny Schulz.
And I'm Kristen Scharrenberg.
What does Noah and the flood have to do with fallen angels, the Nephilim, and the end times? Tune in today and find out. Join us as adventurers through God's Word, the Holy Lands, and beyond, exploring the fascinating and the weird, the difficult and the obscure. Come and see how the stories are woven together and how they still apply to our lives today.
We promise to bring you joy, hope, inspiration, and intriguing out-of-the-box thinking, and ultimately salvation through Jesus Christ. We have exciting news. This is our 17th episode, and the last few episodes have skyrocketed on YouTube, Rumble, and the various podcast sites. Our subscribers have increased on all these forums, as well as on our website, livelifeinthespirit.com. God is advancing this for his use. So please continue to like and subscribe both to YouTube and to our website. Spread the word. We're in perilous times, and time is literally running short. People need to hear the word and the love of God in a world of lies.
Well, right here, we present the truth, because once you know, you can't unknow. Also, if you've not gotten our t-shirt, I would encourage you to do so. It's an awesome way to start a conversation and to lead others to our website through the QR code on the back. Well, I had the honor and the pleasure of accompanying a lady from my congregation to Williamstown, Kentucky, where the Ark Encounter resides. We were kind of thinking of doing the topic on Noah and the Nephilim, and I tell you what, this just solidified that decision.
It did.
So for those of you who don't know about the Ark, it's actually a full replicated structure, size and everything of the Ark. And it was the thought process and the engineering of Ken Ham who brought this about. Well, that morning we got to the hotel, which was right beside the Ark. And that morning before going to the Ark, I stopped to get breakfast. Now, I don't usually ever get breakfast, but I had time and God wanted me to meet someone. I had the pleasure of meeting Ed from Tennessee. The funny thing was, he had prayed actually that morning that God would send somebody into his path at breakfast time that he could show his rocks to. And in enters me. It was really neat and fascinating, and he had no clue who I was, though we had a podcast, and we'd actually talked about this on our episodes 3 and 4 with the dinosaurs. But his whole mantra and passion is to show people the proof of why the flood really did happen. And so this little clip that we're going to play for you is just him talking about those two rocks. What's your name?
I'm Ed.
Okay, Ed. And if you could tell me this again.
That is the summit of Mount Everest. It's a slate rock. The mountain is granite. This rock came up the bottom of an ocean. And when it did, there was creatures at the bottom that were snails that were as big as a car tire, and they're in Tibet now. And here's a snail. That's a snail.
Oh, wow.
There's the animal's juices in the bottom of the ocean. And they were found down there. Most of the time you find them like this. But you break them open. There's the animal.
Oh, wow.
And if you don't believe the flood, go to the Himalayas, pick seashells and fossils.
So this was on Mount Everest too?
No, those are on the Himalaya.
The Himalaya Mountains. That one was from
They have
Everest.
found one of these 50 meters from the top of Everest, I was told. But I only got 14,000 feet. But I was 61 years old.
That's awesome. Thank you. And you're from Tennessee?
Now take Everest off your bucket list.
Okay. So he actually had brought back a piece of the mountain, but technically it isn't the mountain because it's shale from the ocean floor.
On which mountain?
On Mount Everest.
Well, that seems like an odd place for shell from the ocean floor.
Yeah. And so while you're not supposed to remove rocks from the mountain, technically it's not. So
He's
it should be
covered.
okay. He's not actually the one that had gotten it. He said the most he's ever gotten to was 14,000 feet, which is still pretty high. And a shout out to Lynn, our friend from Colorado, who has just conquered a couple more 14ers.
That's right.
This last weekend. So he also showed me that snail fossil that came from the top of the Himalayas. And that was really cool how he talks about that, because you have you have the snail, and when it was in the ocean, it's used to that depth and that pressure and everything. But when it was brought up to the mountain, the atmospheric pressure just took all the juices, as he said, basically all of its fluid and guts, and just squeezed it out and encased the snail in it. And that's what that hard, fossilized black rock is around it.
Fascinating and disgusting all at the same time.
He said there has been one actually discovered as close as 50 meters from the top of Mount Everest.
Oh, wow.
That's
Further proof.
Just further proof. You can't get snails and shale on top of the mountains. Well, we're going to look at the story of Noah. For those of you who maybe you've read, you know the story. For some, maybe you've read the scriptures, and for others, maybe you've forgotten the little details. We're not going to read the whole thing because it goes from chapter 6 all the way through chapter 9, but we wanted to just pull out some of those key little details that some people have forgotten. We're going to start, though, with verse 6.
And I will say that I was one of those people that, as we started reading and preparing, before you even went, I was reading this ahead of time, and I was like, I don't remember that part of the story, so it's good to have a refresher. So when human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God, which would be angels, saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then
Now that translation is interesting, because depending on the translation you read, it'll say they took.
That's probably more accurate.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Now the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went into the daughters of man and had children by them, and they were called heroes of old, men of renown.
The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all of the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled.
So the Lord said, I will wipe them from the face of the earth, the entire human race that I have created. With them, the animals and the birds and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So this is one of the very famous passages that if you've been on YouTube or you've been on the different things and listened to people, they always start here with Genesis chapter 6.
Right.
Verses 1 through about 5. But it talks about when human beings began to increase, that the sons of God. Now it depends on the translation. Some translations that you read are going to say the sons of Seth. But that's not what the Hebrew actually says. The Hebrew says the sons of Adonai, God, saw that the daughters of man, humans, were beautiful. So if the sons of Seth saw the daughters of humans, that sounds a little weird, doesn't it?
It does.
They were beautiful, and they took them. Whichever ones they chose. They didn't have much of a choice.
No, this was not something that the human women were signing up for.
And in the process of doing that, they created this offspring called the Nephilim. The men of renown, the heroes of old. They were half angel, half man. Problem was, they weren't like what we see in Greek mythology as Hercules and the golden hair and buff and beautiful. No, these things were grotesque. They were huge. They were ugly. They tore up a lot of the women. I mean, they have found skeletons of some of these giants that were 50, 75 feet plus tall.
Right.
We're not talking like just Goliath, 13, 15 feet.
Right.
We're talking massive. And they have gobbled up all those bones as fast as they can, and I will say it's pretty much the Smithsonian who has done it. They've taken even a lot of the pictures, but there have been some that have held the test of time, so that way we know. But it talks about the great wickedness. Yes, the people that were still here had turned very wicked, and the problem is when we think of Noah, we think of Noah and the 3 boys and the ark and a few people. We don't think of 1,500 years plus worth of civilizations and cities and millions of people.
Right. There were not just a few other people scattered around.
There were a lot. And it wasn't just cities. Like, they had built temples. They had built ziggurats to these other entities, these fallen realm.
Right. They were evil fully civilized evil.
Yeah, that's why they were evil to the core. Because they had completely turned their heart on God. And most of this would have been the Canaanites. Mm-hmm. So why did the angelic realm take women? They took women not just because they saw they were beautiful. There was a specific reason, and that's kind of what we looked at a little bit in Enoch. But why did they do it?
Because they wanted to dirty the seed.
They wanted to corrupt the DNA. Because if man was the only one created in God's image, and if man is no longer in God's image because his DNA has been changed, well, then they've solved the problem, and they don't have to worry about the prophecy that God said that your seed will be at odds with his seed.
Correct.
So if they could get rid of the pure human race, then Jesus couldn't come from that. And that's why God says, you know what? I'm going to wipe the whole human race from the face of the earth and every creature that moves along. So you may say, why is he getting rid of all the animals? Well, they didn't just stop with humans. They messed with the animal kingdom as well.
Procreated with anything they could.
You know, and here's the interesting thing. So when God created, if you really go by the biblical view of the 6 days of creation, and one could even argue that a day is about 1,000 years. I mean, then you'd still be having 6,000 years of God's creation. But regardless, not millions and billions of years. Why? Because God said he created something, and then there was evening, and then there was morning the next day. If it was billions of years, you can't have evening and morning and the next day.
Right.
Plus the fact, we know that eventually the dinosaurs had become carnivores. Mm-hmm. They had been...
Things had
changed. DNA had changed, because before that, everything was herbivores.
Right.
Even some of what we see now today as the nasty dinosaurs weren't that way back then. And how do we know this? Because we've seen dinosaur bones embedded in thistles, and according to the scriptures, the thorns and thistles did not come about until Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden.
Right, because that wasn't good, and God didn't create that. That didn't happen until we had to work and toil in the land to have it produce food.
So God was looking for pure creatures that were still left, along with the human race. And that's what it says. God says, I regret that I've even made any of them, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And where does Noah come from? He comes from the lineage of Lamech, which comes from Methuselah. Now, you have to realize Methuselah and Lamech were still alive during this time, because Methuselah was the oldest living man, and his name literally means his death shall bring destruction. So they knew that something was coming. So as long as great-grandpa's still alive, we're okay. So this was one of the neat things that maybe you never caught about the boat. When we think of the boat, we think of, well, you've seen the nursery pictures, the big round boat with the animals with their heads sticking out, you know, like everybody's on top of one another, just this big boat, and how are they going to shove everything in, and every time it tosses, they're rolling on each other. Well, that's not even what the scriptures say.
No, this was interesting. This was something that when I reread it, I was like, oh, huh.
So I didn't remember that.
I didn't remember that. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, which is another name for gopher wood. That's the one we're familiar with. Make rooms in it. Aha, rooms. I didn't remember that. And coat it with pitch inside and out.
Now, there's a reason for that, too, that a lot of people don't realize. They would put pitch on one side to keep it afloat so water wouldn't come in. But by putting pitch on both sides,
it preserved it.
It preserved it because God wanted that ark to still be there today, which many argue it is, and they've even found it.
So this is how you're going to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Make a roof for it, leaving below the roof an opening 1 cubit high all around. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks. And then everything on earth will perish. So just the fact that there's 3 levels to it, and it said to create rooms, I just never, I guess, processed that when I read it before. But that part was really cool.
Yeah. And it's kind of sobering when you read that everything will perish. Well, so when it's talking about a cubit, you may say, well, what's a cubit? Well, that's a very good question, because it depends. It's based on a king. It was from the tip of his finger to his elbow. And so it could be anywhere from 17 and a half to 18 inches is roughly what a cubit is. So when it's talking about 300 cubits long, that's actually 510 feet. And when it says 50 cubits wide, it's like 87 feet.
Like that.
And 30 cubits high is 51 feet. This was a big boat.
It was a big boat.
But here's the thing. He says in verse 18, so he's talking to Noah. He says, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark. So he's already telling him before anything happens that I am establishing a covenant just with you. And then at the end of verse 22, I love this, and Noah did everything just as God had commanded him. So God gives Noah a lot of instructions. Some are written down, but we know that there was a lot more instructions than what we're given. We're given the Cliff Note version.
Right.
This is another thing that we don't think of. You know, Noah was 600 years old when the flood came on the earth. It took him 100 years about to build the ark.
That's a long time.
And we always focus on the outside again of the ark. When you look at what all had to go on the inside for all those rooms, for all the cages, for all the everything for them and the animals.
Because that was one other thing it does talk about in the scripture is to plan for food for you and for the animals. And so they had to accommodate for all of that.
A lot of people say, you know, oh, God just like put the animals to sleep. That's why they didn't eat anything or produce any manure, or that's why they didn't have to worry about eating other animals. No, they each have their own cages, and God says you need to have them separated and you need to have water.
It would have been a lot easier for Noah if that would have happened. But that's not how God did it.
Nope. And it says, after 7 days, the flood waters came on the earth. So in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, on the day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and the rain fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights.
And I don't think I thought about that as much. It's not just that water came down from the heavens for the first time, but it came up. I mean, water was coming from all over.
Now, why, I don't know about you, but did you ever wonder why in the verses it put that before Noah came into the ark?
Yeah.
Because later, if you see in verse 16 is where it's telling him that all the creatures were going to come to him. God was literally bringing the animals that he wanted, because you have to realize, if the three boys were out running around chasing animals, how did they know if they were the pure ones or not? God brought the specific species that he wanted, 2 of every kind of the unclean and 7 of every kind of the clean, and they entered the ark.
Mm-hmm. Only God could do that.
Only God could do that. But here's the next thing. So 7 days before even a drop of rain fell, then it said the Lord shut him in. He sealed the door. We don't think of that either. We think of, like somehow closing the door. Well, but it would have gotten wet. So by God sealing that, not only was it a protection against the water, but you have to realize that way no one else could beat down the door to try to get in.
Because I'm sure that they've all seen him. I mean, when you see the size of the ark, when you really physically see it, people, I'm sure, thought he lost his ever-loving mind. And it had never rained before.
No, it had just been a mist that watered from the bottom, so they had no clue what rain was. Okay, so it's talking about for 40 days the flood kept coming. So it's coming from the bottom, it's coming from the top. And this is where we talked about in our 3rd episode about how maybe possibly one of the ideas is the ice sheet that was above the earth, and the magnetic had been pulled to the poles, and that's when it fell. It's a possibility. But the waters grow.
So the waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 15 cubits, which is 270 feet?
Yeah, not like inches.
That's a lot.
That is.
Way over the tops of the highest mountains. That's a lot.
So you think Mount Everest being the highest or whatever, some of the, the Himalayas and stuff. We're talking over 300, almost 300 feet above.
Above that. That's a lot of water. There's no way that much water covered the earth and it didn't leave its
Mark.
everywhere.
Yeah.
That's how come there's snails on Mount Everest.
That's right.
In the Himalayas.
So it says, and the waters flooded the earth for 150 days.
That's way longer than the 40 days and 40 nights that we think.
I know, everyone goes, oh, well, it was just 40 days. Like, big deal. It was a month and a week. You know,
Right.
40 days, 40 nights. No, I mean, you get that much water 300 feet above the highest mountains.
It took a long time to build up to that point, and then it stayed there for 150 days. Then it has to go away.
I mean, that's still really pretty remarkable if you think about it going that long, and then in just 150 days, it starts going back down. Where to go? That much water, where to go? Only God could do that. So it says, at the end of the 150 days, the water had gone down, and on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. It took that long just for the waters to recede enough to
270 feet.
the tops of the mountains.
By the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the water had dried up from the earth. Noah then removed the covering from the ark and saw that the surface of the ground was dry. By the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry.
So here you have the whole recounting of Noah being in the ark for almost a year. Year.
That's a long time.
And we do have the dove. He sent out the first raven the first time and nothing, and then the dove, and they came back on an olive branch, and then the last time he went out, he didn't come back. So that's how he knew. Right. So we know that God was still in the business of creating again, because you can't have water destroy everything and all of a sudden have all this vegetation grow up. You see that in fires, but not floods.
Right.
The Noah, here's the important thing. It says, and Noah built an altar to the Lord. This was the first thing he did. And taking some of all the clean animals and the clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. And the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done.
And God said, this is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you, and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth.
You know, what people don't realize is this covenant that we're talking about is different than contracts.
Right.
Contracts can be torn up, they can be dissolved, they can be lost and forgotten. It's a piece of paper.
Right.
But in order to have a covenant, it requires
Sacrifice.
a blood sacrifice. It's huge. Covenant is so much bigger and deeper than a contract.
And this one comes with a lot of bloodshed.
Yeah, so every time you see that rainbow, yes, it's a promise, but it's also a reminder that the entire world was destroyed, and we're only here today because of God's mercy and allowing 8 people to live. So he said, whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, now this is God talking. He said, I will see it. He will see his part of the covenant and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth. So, what does Noah flood have to do with the fallen angels, the Nephilim, and the end times? Well, we kind of talked a little bit about the Nephilim and about the fallen realm. What was their entire goal?
To dirty the sea.
What people don't realize, so, you say, okay, you had the Nephilim before. They were so big, and they were literally consuming everything. This was the whole reason why it was so corrupt. It was so much more than even now with people turning their backs on God. I mean, these things, they were so big, they had consumed up all the food in a way, and they had turned on each other, and then they started turning on the humans and on the animals, and they were basically just drinking their blood. And that's why God says, enough. Enough. This is not what I created. And so we looked at this with Enoch. a little bit, right? When the waters were over that earth for those 5 months, 150 days, those waters were there, and they had to literally watch their offspring be destroyed.
Right.
God made them watch before he put them in Tartarus. That is the exact same amount of time that in Revelation 9, when the angel comes down with the key and opens up the abyss, and those disembodied spirits are allowed to come out and torment the unbelievers for how many days?
5 months.
Yeah, 150 days, 5 months. It's the exact same amount. So God goes, okay, you drowned for 5 months, you were under the water, but now I'm going to let you out for the exact same amount of time. I don't know why, but that's like...
It's got to be important because that's too
pretty
specific.
incredible.
Yeah, it's way too specific.
So it said that there were Nephilim in those days, and then again. Okay, so we do see this lineage still came. Okay, so we don't know that Noah's daughter-in-laws were pure.
We don't. We know that God allowed them to live, but we don't know that they were pure.
And so that's where you see we get these giants again. But they're not as big. They're not, well, because now you have humans with, I guess, this genetic mutation. I mean, you don't have angels actually doing the procreating.
Right.
And that's where we get Goliath and his brothers, and we get Og of Bashan, we get Nimrod. So where the interesting thing with this is the fallen realm, though, are still around. And they kind of get a hold of Ham, and I'm trying to think of who I watched. I have watched so many documentaries from so many people. But I remember watching one where they had gotten a hold of Ham, and they had written on tablets this information that man was not supposed to know. And we don't think about that this civilization, like I said, they had temples, they were using metallurgy. They had swords, they were using probably metal rivets and metal brackets to put some of this stuff together. It wasn't just rudimentary stuff.
Well, and you know, we talked a little bit about the fact that they were sharing knowledge back at the beginning, but they continue to do that even today. That's a big part of the problem, is they're continuing to share knowledge that we're not supposed to have.
When they come out of the ark, where was the ark at? Where did it land?
On the highest mountain, Mount Ararat.
It's on, the higher mountains.
Higher mountains.
Now, if God's the one in charge of all this, if you would think that he'd make it easy for him, where would the ark have rested? It would have just kept coming down with the water, and it would have landed on...
Because they're going to need to have wood and supplies and everything in order to reestablish. He didn't want them to use the ark for that.
No, that's why you had to pitch it on both sides, and that's why it's up there, because they could not use anything of the ark. It needed to be preserved for a time that it will be unearthed to prove to everybody that it is true. And there's another episode of what happens with him, with his mom and his dad, and that's why he is actually cursed beyond curse, and why Cush, and then down the way, and you get
if you look at Ham's offspring, it goes from bad to worse.
Yeah, really bad.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah, and then Nimrod with the Tower of Babel. So that's getting down the way. Well, I'm just going to put up a couple pictures, but you can get online and you can look up the Ark Encounter, and they've got some fascinating things on their website of what to see. But it's just the sheer size of it. It is huge. But, you know, in comparison, it is actually like just a little bit taller than the Statue of Liberty with the torch up all the way.
If it was laying flat. It's longer,
Right, and if it was next to the Titanic, it's just a little bit over halfway of the Titanic. So even though this thing is massive,
it's not, that kind of blew my mind. I didn't realize the Titanic was that much larger.
Yeah. And then the 3 floors, and how this was, now, and this is licensure on their own part, artistic licensure of what it would have looked like, but they kind of figured out how many species there really would have been back then. And that's the other interesting thing that we don't think about. A lot of those species that were are now extinct, because what they would have saved, everything changed.
Right.
It was like a tropical environment. It was, like I said, it hadn't rained, and
the
wasn't scattered.
The entire Earth was all kind of a similar climate until after the flood. And after the flood, everything changed.
Everything changed. So then
we talked about that in episodes 3 and 4 about even the oxygen content was different, and
Right. So they do have depictions of a lot of dinosaurs in cages that were, smaller, and everything was smaller kind of back then. But they also had, here's the fun thing. So for the 3,600 different species, they said even if you doubled it, even some, they could get to 62. But they had figured out that it would take 322,400 gallons of water for that time. And there was even a system that they could collect rainwater from the roof as it came in to replenish the water
supply.
It took 95,100 gallons of storage vessels, and there's pictures of that as well, which is really cool because one of the vessels that they had in there, we know is correct because
we saw it in Israel.
That's right. We have pictures of it from Shiloh that they've excavated, and it wasn't even broken.
No.
It was protected.
Yeah, that was really neat.
400 tons of food, 15,000 storage food vessels, 22 extra large cages. This is what they have in their ark, I think. 186 large cages, 293 medium, 308 bird cages, 170 small cages, and 415 of the amphibian cages.
Which those were cool.
Yeah, they're like these clay pots, and then they had a cheesecloth over the top. And so you'd have your lizards or whatever inside, and you could put water from the top, and it would drip through the cheesecloth, and that's what watered them. And then they had a moth system, like this big container that the moths that just kept reproducing, and they had tubes going, and the moths would just fly in, and it was like a self-feeder. That was just kind of weird.
That was really cool. I thought that was neat.
And they said though that 85% of the animals probably back then were under 22 pounds. It'd be a lot easier to get stuff in. Only 8% were over 220 pounds. I'm like, wow, I'd be pretty close to that 8%. But we think of, we just don't think of the mechanics of it.
No.
And what was so fun is, if you're farmers like we are or have animals, well, it's just common knowledge. Anybody here's ever had a hamster, right? What do you have? You have a little water bottle with the little thing on it, so it was like a salt water. Same way as you got a dog water. Well, that's what they had. They had these big clay containers with the basins at the bottom that could serve two cages at a time. And then there was a pipe that came out of it, and of course you had walkways up above, and they could just pour water through those pipes to keep those vessels full, so they're automatic waters. And then they had the funnels with, well, so to speak, think of a downspout that came down with a little thing for food. So it was like self-feeders that way. And there were slats on the floor, and they had these little flat dolly things that went underneath that caught the manure. And so it really was not high tech.
No, it was
a way to remove the waste. It was a way to keep them fed, to keep them watered.
And all in their cages. Yeah. They weren't out wandering around. They weren't
running around causing havoc and, making a mess.
Sticking their head out the window.
True. And the other cool thing that they showed, too, was then how on the sides, how they were able to put all of these vessels on there and all the food. You had the cages in the center. You had plenty of room for walkways. And on the third floor,
that was the living quarters.
That was for them.
And that was neat, too.
It was. It was really neat to see because, they had a spot which was their kitchen, so to speak, and then an area where they kept their food, the onions and the different fruit and vegetables. And then they had things planted and herbs.
So that they could have all of that to have afterwards.
Right, and on the side was the rakes and the hoes and the shovels and something that they're going to need to start over again. That was just really neat to see. And, and I've always argued that how Enoch survived was that something had to have been written on the scroll, and then it would have had to have been put on the ark to be saved. And they did even have a place. Now, I don't know how much of this would even be correct, but they did have an area in Noah's thing where there was
a bunch of
wall of scrolls,
which was cool.
That had been saved.
Because God would have commanded him to keep those things if it was important.
If it was. Yeah. And an area for construction so they could patch things if they need to, or then later they would have the tools to start over. And they had an interesting thing with the blacksmith. And of course, being on the third level, you could pipe things out, including an oven or something like that.
Sure.
Which then shows that if they were doing blacksmithing, they had the capabilities of doing metal.
Metallurgy, yep.
I did appreciate what they did show, though, with the different temples and the different sacrificing to those deities. And on one of them, I don't know how many people caught it, probably mostly only me, but I was all excited because here was the image of Ananu.
Right.
Ishtar, Isis, right there on the side of the temple in gold. And it's like, I know who that is.
We've studied her a little bit.
And of course, where she was at, they had all the virgins and they had the priests and they had, yeah.
Well, and it just gave you a really great idea of the fact that there was such civilization happening and all of the evil that the humans were doing, aside from the fact that the seed had been tainted and corrupted. Also that they had turned from God in so many ways.
It had completely written God out of
Their story.
everything. Except for Methuselah. You know, they always talk about the grandparent is usually the one that keeps the family together. That's, you know, if you have family dinners or you do things together, it's because of that grandma or that grandpa. And when that generation goes, it falls apart. They just don't stay together anymore.
Right.
And I think of Methuselah, while he was, yes, living the oldest, and it was that time of grace. But he also kept the legacy that he passed down was to Lamech and then to Noah.
Absolutely.
For Noah to still love God and be blameless. They say that Noah he was righteous and blameless. If you look in the Hebrew, the actual word for it is the same word that they use for unblemished when it's talking about a sacrificial lamb. And that's why they were talking about he was the pure DNA.
Right.
That he was still untainted.
Right.
They had a mural on there too that was hit me kind of hard. It was depicting what that city would have looked like with all the people in the temples and the waves crashing down. And there's a spot on the end of that with a mom and a baby, you know, terrified, reaching up for some man's hand as these waves are coming, and you know that she's reaching for the wrong thing to be saved. And it didn't have to be that way, but they purposely just... So when you think about that, it's like, oh, they couldn't have known. Yes, they did. For 100 years, Noah was working on this ark, and he was telling people about it.
Right.
And they laughed.
They chose to continue turning from God.
A lot of people don't realize that Noah lived another 349 years after the flood. 350 from when he went into the ark.
Right. That's a long time. That's a long time.
But some of the things that I thought were really interesting in that was the things that the scripture says that God did. God gave the blueprints and the instructions. And God
brought the animals
to the ark and in the ark. And what did God do?
He shut the door. Shut the door. You know, part of me wonders if he wasn't, I don't know, maybe saving Noah from the burden of having been one to shut the door.
Yeah. And I think by putting them in 7 days before, it gave them a chance to get acclimated. And you have to wonder if they heard everything or not. That would have to be
horrifying
to hear the screams.
Because these would have been, I mean,
he knew
them. They could have been family members.
Very much were family members and friends.
And we don't know if Noah only had 3 boys. He could have had other children.
It was just 3 that were saved.
Right.
You know, now this is tradition and Jewish tradition, but we know that Methuselah died that year before the flood, but the tradition is that he actually died 7 days, a week before the flood. And when did God put Noah in the ark?
That day.
7 days before. His death will bring destruction. So Methuselah passes away, and that's another reason that Noah didn't have a problem going into the ark, because
he'd heard the stories. He knew.
So as we look at this, you know, we go, okay, so how do we go from the Old Testament, why does that matter then to the New Testament? Where are those parallels? Well, we see the fallen angels, and they had to watch their offspring, their prodigy, die, and then the worst of the worst, those 200 got put into Tartarus, but we have the other fallen angels that have still been pumping information. And then you have all those disembodied spirits. And where did they all congregate, kind of?
In the valley of the shadow of death, or shades, or travelers.
Valley of travelers. And yes, and they're out and about. And so we see that this has just been an ongoing battle. We talk about the battle between the seeds. They tried to get rid of it. It didn't happen. They tried to get rid of Jesus on the cross. It didn't happen. And then in the end time, what do we have? We have that fight of the seed of the serpent.
Right, with the seed of
Jesus when he comes. And even Jesus says, and, a lot of people say, well, if it's not in the New Testament, I don't believe it. Well, Jesus even says that just like in the days of Noah,
right?
If Noah didn't exist, if the flood didn't exist,
and if it didn't matter to us still today, right?
And there's that running covenant between all the scriptures.
Oh,
First, it was a covenant with Adam, and then it was a covenant with Noah, and then Abraham. Then Moses, and then the ultimate sacrifice. But just like that, when the door was shut, Jesus says, I am the door. And he talks about just like that with the bridegroom. And the door's going to be shut. And he's going to say, I do not know you if you did not get on the inside. That parallel between those two doors shutting is shattering.
It is.
The sound is just shattering.
Because you don't have to be on the outside of the door.
No, you don't. And Jesus doesn't want you to be on the outside of the door. God doesn't want you to be on the outside of the door.
And I think that was the other thing with this that I really have just been impressed on my heart is just God's heart was hurting, seeing his creation being destroyed in that way. But I know that it hurt him to destroy it because he loved. I mean, he said, and it was good.
It was good. Every day, God said.
And it was good.
It was good.
When I think looking at it past the fun children's songs that we sing at Vacation Bible School, it's often a story because it's animals and it's a boat. I think we leave it and continue looking at it from that perspective rather than coming back and looking for the meat and potatoes of it as adults. We think of it as
or the soberness of it. I mean, the rainbow, everything, it's the promise, but it's a covenant, and it's, we look at we forget about those who perished.
Yeah, millions of people would have died.
Well, it's kind of sobering and kind of somber, and so then it's like, how do you just move right into joy break then? I don't know, but I guess we're going to have to figure out a way to lighten the load.
That's right.
As we come off of this meat and potatoes, it's been kind of a heavy meal.
It has. We need some kind of fresh dessert.
There you go. So I guess now's a good time for
Joy break. So we're going to try something a little different today for our joy break. Penny is great at thinking on her feet and always has this the show must go on mentality. So we're going to put it and her to the test today. So we were talking one day about different things we could do for our joy break, and we said it would be fun to update some of the parables that Jesus used and make them more current. So I'm just going to throw out a parable and see what Penny can come up with.
Okay.
So the first one is the marriage feast or the great banquet.
Yeah, okay, so the first one, they sent out invitations to all of his friends. And what did his friends say? I'm going to a football game. I got to go fishing. I got golf, tea time. Sorry. See you later. I suppose the women are like, I'm going shopping.
I'm going shopping.
So then the guy gets mad and he goes, really? All my friends are ditching me out. I can actually kind of relate because we had all of John's buddies come, and they came to the wedding, but once they found out there was no alcohol at the reception, they found another. It was a little better. The bridegroom goes out and says, okay, then go out and find other people. So he goes out into the streets and he brings in other people. What?
I think he just put out a Twitter message.
And then everybody was walking around with their phone and they were going, hey, party at the palace.
Right.
And so they all come, and then there was still more room, and so then they go out into the streets to the homeless shelters and people under the bridge, and they
brought them all
in, and they served them pizza, and if you're from Nebraska, it was runza and lunch salad dressing and Valentino pizza.
That's right. A good time was had by all. We won't talk about what happened to the ones
that didn't catch any fish, and the ones that ended up going way over par.
And if they were watching
and the
Huskers, they lost. Sorry.
Or the Chiefs.
Hey, we won.
I was going to say, this week the Huskers and the Chiefs actually won, so.
All right, so not bad. All right, let's see, what's the next one? Okay, so what about the rich fool?
This is the story of my life from Bel Air. Prince of Bel Air.
Nice.
He's got more Nintendos, PlayStations, toys, 4 cell phones.
Lots of
he's probably got a branded Corvette. He's got a rich house. He's got
a couple of islands maybe somewhere.
Underground pool.
A couple of football teams probably.
And Jesus says, "Yo, follow me." And he goes, I can't.
I'm good.
I'm good. I'd love to. Oh, we gotta stay in a tent? Oh, we don't even get a tent. Can't give up my McDonald's and fries. Right. It's just not happening.
I have a $10,000 bed.
I can't have my cell phone. Right. That would eliminate most people right now.
It really would.
No social media.
You've gone too far.
I'd like to, but I'll see you later.
The lost sheep.
If that was today, they'd be like, well, if you take the iPods out of your ears, probably you know my voice. But you know what? That's okay, because the one traveling off from the 99, they just will computer chip you and not be able to track you. Pull out my phone. Yeah, right over there.
Be a lot easier to be a shepherd today.
Oh, and that was so funny when we were in Israel too, because they're on their donkeys, whatever. They're sitting on a rock and they're looking at the sheep and they're Bedouin tents and they're on their phones.
I know. It was like
everything's
east meets west, old meets new.
Everything's satellite internet, so they're on their internet the whole time. It was
weird. It was weird. It was like, one of these things is not like the other. Breathing heavy once again.
That's not a parable. Delilah. That's a story, not a parable.
Today's Joy Break is sponsored by
Adam and Eve.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is why I wanted to do this today. Oh, I really hope one of those doesn't get edited out on accident.
Okay, so now we're going to go to serious with what do you do with that? So we talked about a lot of stuff, and we know the Noah story. Maybe you didn't know all the bits and pieces, but you can go, oh, interesting, but what's that got to do with my life today? Well, it's still going on today and more than ever before. In fact, I would say that the fallen realm has ramped it up so much that everything that was going on, Jesus said, just like in the last days will be just like the days of Noah. Yeah, he was talking about them going about their business, but there are some other key things to there, because what was going on in Noah's time?
They were trying to destroy the seed. They were mating with all different kinds of things. They were trying to come up with bodysuits.
And what's going on now?
All of the above and more.
Right, as we read, just from the last one, that
we've created a human embryo
from just stem cells. We're not even using eggs and sperm anymore.
Still terrifying.
And if we're not doing the bodysuits, they're working with the AIs and robotics and technology, and
they're finding new ways to influence and to have influence, power, control over society in any way they possibly can.
And I think the big thing right here is just that society's going along with it.
Right.
And that's what was going on in the times of Noah. I mean,
Right.
this stuff should have never happened, and they should have put the kibosh to it right away, and they didn't. They just let it completely snowball. And where are we at now? We have the few small remnant that are silent, or if we're not silent, it's like we're not even making a drop in the bucket.
And it's terrifying.
And it's snowballing.
Because the ultimate thing is that you're going to end up on the wrong side of the door.
Mm-hmm.
And that...
Well, and they're using this because, as we see in Revelation, and we're actually going to get into that. We're going to get into the Assyrian, the Antichrist. We're going to get into the final Nephilim, which we really believe that the Antichrist is actually going to be the Nephilim.
Yeah.
I would even argue, I guess spoiler alert, that it's the resurrected Nimrod.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not the only one that kind of thinks that too.
No.
But we see all this is coming to fruition. Again, when the angel comes down and he opens up the gates of hell and those disembodied spirits come back out, what did they do before? They were tormenting the people on the earth. They were consuming them, and now they're going to get to torment them. They can't kill them.
Right.
This is the people wish they were dead.
Right.
But they're going to be tortured and tormented. What else have they been taken from Noah's Ark? Well, look at, like we said, it's on every nursery. Really, do we really want that on your... Think about that. You're naming your child Noah. Do you really know what you're naming him? He was righteous and blameless, and he was a righteous priest.
That's a good thing.
That's a good thing. But we're putting the ark, the symbol of death and destruction, but I mean, they were saved in the ark. And the rainbow's the promise, but the whole embodiment of that story is
much darker and deeper.
Darker and deeper.
Then
it was starting over.
it really was. God, it was hitting the reset button.
Well, so look at what our society has then done with, we're getting, the story of Noah doesn't exist. The flood doesn't exist. The 6 days of creation doesn't exist, or 6,000. No, it was billions and trillions of years. And all this stuff happened. There's a problem with that. Because besides the evening and morning, day one, and God said it was good. Okay, if you have dinosaurs on the earth and they're eating each other and there's death and there's destruction, is that good?
No.
No. And if the dinosaurs were all gone and then man comes along and then all this happens and God doesn't even exist with the flood or anything, then there's no point for Jesus.
We don't need salvation. And that's the whole point. They're continuing to try to remove God so that we don't feel like we need salvation.
No, we don't need Jesus. We don't need any of that. And for all those people that are buying into it, they're going to be the ones pounding on the door, let me in. And they're going to hear, I do not know you. Yeah.
That's sobering.
Well, it is. And then, I'm sorry, but this makes me so mad. When they take the rainbow, which I said is not a symbol, it is a covenant. Nowhere in the Bible, in the scriptures, is it called a symbol. It's not a contract. It is a covenant. It is a blood shed, bought and paid for covenant between man and God of not destroying the earth. And we've used it for the Wizard of Oz. Now, I'm not against the Wizard of Oz, but really think about it. It's a wizard and it's witches. You know, I mean, seriously.
Probably not something we want to use.
It's not what you're going to find at the end of the rainbow or Lucky Charms.
Right.
You're going to find a cross at the end of the rainbow. And we're using it for social movements. Why on earth are we using it for social issues? That's not what it's about. It's a blood-bought covenant that is not supposed to be used flippantly around for whatever our society deems it wants to use it for.
No. No, because it continues to cheapen the meaning.
And lessen.
Yeah.
And change.
Oh, absolutely.
The whole meaning.
Because then you're not thinking of that sacrifice and of the bloodshed or the fact that we're not talking about the social movement. We're talking about using it how it's
about what they're using
right.
for social movements.
Right. Any social movement wouldn't be okay.
No, because it's a blood-bought covenant. I know I've said that many times, but I want it to really sink in for people.
Millions of people died.
Yeah. And it's not something to be taken flippantly as we talked about with the false prophets. It's sacred. It's profaning
Right.
the sacredness of what that rainbow represents. It's not just for us as a reminder, it is, but it's also a reminder to God that even no matter how bad it's gonna get, he said, I won't do it again.
Yeah.
Not by flood.
Right.
In the end, but Christ will be here reigning. The thing that blew me away with the Ark Encounter, but it just brought home a lot of things that when you can visually see it, it makes it so much more real.
It really does.
So what were some of the things that you pulled from seeing some of the pictures of the Ark? Now again, this was artistic licensure, but knowing that and knowing the things in the scriptures that you had missed about the different floors and the rooms or the cages and the food and and even though it was rudimentary, you still had ways to feed them and water them and clean up after them. What was your perception after seeing the pictures or hearing that stuff?
I think for me, first of all, I didn't realize that it took 100 years. And it just made the reality of the situation so much bigger. And just seeing how much thought and foresight and everything that went into making the Ark and all of this stuff on the inside. I thought about the outside. I never thought about the inside. I just never did. Never.
No.
And so that was really amazing to see what it could have looked like. And then I think even just recognizing that I guess it was a further reminder that what we get from the Bible about these stories is a quick Cliff Notes version, and that God would have given Noah all he needed,
the details,
all of it,
everything, the
to do it,
and that they had the intellect and the wisdom,
right? Because they've been around
to do it,
right? And when we allow for some of that artistic licensure that's well within what could have been, it just helps us to see the full picture.
Well, and realize that maybe our perception is wrong, and maybe that's not all right, but you know what? What we were thinking maybe wasn't all right either.
Right.
And God is so big.
He's not limited by our imagination.
No, that's why we have out-of-the-box thinking.
That's right.
I think for me, as we come kind of to wrapping this up, what do you do with that? It was seeing the visual pictures of a civilization, cities, people that were so lost, that were doing everything wrong, that had turned their backs on God. And then that picture, and I'm going to put it up here so you can see it, it's worth 1,000,000,000,000,000 words.
Yeah.
She wasn't just clinging to the rock. She was reaching up for the hand. She was reaching up for the wrong hand.
Yeah.
And that terrified look. It was too late. But it didn't need to be that way. And that's what's going to be in the end times. People, after the rapture, are going to be going,
I missed it.
It was real. I missed it. They said it. I heard it.
I didn't believe it.
I didn't believe it. I thought I had time. So our prayer is that everybody who's listening to this, that they're going to take these words to heart. And maybe spend some time tonight pondering that over with you and your family. Where's your family at? Which side of the door are you going to find yourself on? Until next time. Shalom.